Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the next sermon here in our series, When Fathers Hide Their Sins, They Lose Their Sons. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 30 through 31. We're going to close out the chapter tonight, and I am looking forward to the next several sermons. I, for a long time as a Christian, had no idea who this person named Hushai was. And many years ago, when I came across Hushai, as I was reading through the Samuel and the Kings and Chronicles, I just fell in love with this guy. I have just fallen in love with Hushai. I think he is one of the best unknown, unheard of Bible characters that I have come across. And so I'm looking forward to Hushai is about to come on the scene. We don't know a whole lot about him, but we're going to see some character that he's going to display. We're going to see God use him. And then Hushai's just going to kind of disappear off the scene again. And so tonight we're going to start with this thought. We just finished up our mini-series within this bigger series, When Fathers Hide Their Sins, They Lose Their Sons. And then I kind of gave you a 3-part mini-series in the middle of all of this that I've titled What to Do When Your Life Falls Apart. And so we kind of closed that out. Now we're about to run into this new Bible character that is going to get right in the middle for the next 2 or 3 chapters, right in the middle of David's problem. If his life's falling apart, he said, okay, I'm going to continue to charge forward. I'm going to keep good Christian friends around me. I am going to do all of the right things that I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to go and talk to the Lord and cry out to God and do all of the right things. And now he's about to find out some more bad news. So let's look tonight. We're going to be again in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 31 through 37. So just read here 7 verses for us. How can I be an answer to prayer? David's life has fallen apart. He's made some personal choices on what to do about his life falling apart. Now we're going to see this new character in Hushai and how he is an answer to David's prayer. And so I want you to see from Hushai's life how you can be an answer to prayer, how you can personally be. Now, you may not be the item that somebody's praying for. You may not be necessarily the thing, the monetary thing, the material thing. You might not be those things, but you can be the master's thing. You can be the person that God uses in somebody's life to be an answer to prayer. And so let's look here. David's on the run. Absalom's come in to take the kingdom. He's gotten these soldiers and these men and his family, and they're heading out towards the wilderness, and he's climbing the Mount of Olives here. In verse 31 through verse 37, we're going to read. It says in verse 31, "And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." Now, Ahithophel enters into the picture. He's kind of a new character in all of this. We find out that Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba, and he's got a lot of bitterness and anger and malice towards David. We find out that he's very jealous, and he is very interested in getting back at David, and he's going to side himself with Absalom, David's son. And so Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom, and David said, "O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." Now, this is a super interesting thing to me. I probably say that a lot. This is super interesting to me. This is super interesting to me. You're probably sick of hearing me telling you how interesting certain things are to me. But it's interesting to me that David says his prayer, after there's someone who comes to David and says, Ahithophel is with Absalom. He is among the conspirators with Absalom. David immediately turns to go to pray to God. And Hushai is going to be David's answer to his prayer. That's who God's going to send him. So David immediately turns to pray and says, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Now here's the interesting thing. Ahithophel's name. Ahithophel's name means my brother is foolish. My brother is foolish. And man, I could go into a whole long detail thing about a great picture here of how somebody fulfills the definition of their name, how it almost is like God, by Ahithophel's name, it's almost like God has answered David's prayer before he even prayed for it. And I think about where Jesus says that God knows the things we need before we even ask for them. And I could just go into a whole thing about that. But Ahithophel's name means, go look it up for yourself. You can use Strong's Concordance. You can use Brown Driver Briggs is another one I use. But Ahithophel's name means my brother is foolish. And David prays almost the very name of Ahithophel. He says, God, I want you to turn the counsel that Ahithophel is going to use with Absalom into foolishness. I want you, God, to get right in the middle of this situation and do what I can't do. Let me read it one more time. David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God. So David prays, he continues on his journey, and he gets to the mountain top. That when he come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. Now, I don't know if Hushai left with David. I don't know if Hushai came with Zadok and Abiathar. I don't know if Hushai has come on his own. In fact, as you continue to read the story, what you'll find is, here in our next sermon we'll do, right after this one, there's some lies that are told about Mephibosheth, because Mephibosheth stays back in the palace, and Ziba lies about Mephibosheth and what he's doing back there. So there is David is gathering everybody in the palace, and he's getting the soldiers, and he's getting Ittai, and he's getting his family, and they're all leaving. And then there's a kind of a second thing that's going on simultaneously with Zadok and Abiathar getting the Ark of the Covenant of their own desire to say, well, Absalom may take the king's throne, but he's not taking God's throne. And they come out, and it may be that Hushai kind of is getting wind of all this and leaves. It may be that he left with all of them. I don't really know. If you figure it out, email the church, call the church, let me know. I think it's interesting that Hushai the Archite comes. He knows what's going on because he comes with his coat rent and earth upon his head. This was the Middle Eastern way of displaying outwardly that you have trouble in your heart inwardly. And now he comes to David like this, and in verse 33 it says, Unto whom David said, If thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. So David comes to the top of the mount. He's worshiping God. Hushai the Archite comes out to meet him. And David says, If you pass on with me, then thou shalt be a burden to me. Now, there's kind of, as this story unfolds, you'll find three distinct characters. There's probably more than three. But you've got Zadok and Abiathar who come out. And David tells them to go back home. You've got Ittai who comes out. David says, Come with me to Ittai. I guess in order, Ittai would be first. David says, you can come with me. After Ittai says, I want to go with you. Zadok and Abiathar say, I want to go with you. And David says, no, go back home. Hushai comes out, and David's going to tell him to go back home. And then there's going to be another character in a couple of chapters named Barzillai. And Barzillai is going to come out, and David's going to tell him that he wants him to come. But Barzillai is going to say, no, I don't want to. I'm an older man. I think if you read all of those passages, what you'll find is there's an insinuation here in this passage when David says that if you go on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. There's indication here that David's saying this because Hushai is an older man. That there's going to be a responsibility that David feels that if Hushai goes with him, that Hushai is an older man. He's not like Ittai, a warrior. He's not like the Zadok and Abiathar, who are the priests. He's not like some of those men. But he's an older man, and he probably, this long distance walk, this journey that they're taking is going to be very strenuous. And David, caring for people, is going to care for him. And David says, it'd be better for me if you didn't go with us. In fact, David is thinking to himself, I just prayed for God to turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness, and God has sent you to me. And so David begins to portray to Hushai what he would like for him to do. Now remember, the title here is How Can I Be an Answer to Prayer? This is what Hushai is. So we're going to pick up on some things that Hushai did that enabled him to be an answer to David's prayer. So he comes, Hushai comes out, he's got his coat rent, the earth is upon his head, and David says to him, listen, if you come with me, if thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. But, he says, if thou return to the city, and say unto Absalom, I will be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hitherto, so will I now also be thy servant, then mayest thou for me defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. That's what David just prayed. That's what David just prayed, and God sent Hushai to be an answer to this prayer, and David recognizes it, and David tells Hushai, he says, listen, if you'll go back and pretend to be on Absalom's side, God will use you in a great way as an answer to this prayer. In fact, the Bible even tells us that's the purpose. If this isn't enough to indicate that Hushai is the distinct answer to David's prayer, over in 2 Samuel chapter 17 and verse number 14, it says that and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel by using Hushai's counsel. This was revealed to us from this point when Hushai comes in to when Hushai finally accomplishes the answer to this prayer. God is going to use him. David's prayer was to turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness, and God sent Hushai to be that man for David. And so David begins to lay out for Hushai, if you go with me, you're going to be a burden to me because you're an older man, because I'm going to be worried about you because I care about you. He says, but if you go back to the city and tell Absalom you'll be his servant, then you'll be able to be used by God to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. Why did David pray for Ahithophel, for his counsel to be turned into foolishness? Well, Ahithophel was David's counselor. You find that in some other passages I think it's over in Chronicles, it talks about Ahithophel was David's counselor, but Hushai was David's companion. And what's happening here is David knows Ahithophel's not some dummy. Ahithophel is a man who knows how to run a kingdom and has been almost a second man to David. And there's some insinuation in the Psalms when David talks about his own friend who has betrayed him. That very well may have been Ahithophel. So they were close. And they probably had lots of conversations. Maybe they were walking to the temple together or walking to worship the Lord together. And maybe they were out doing some sort of Middle Eastern activity like sports or something together. I don't know. But they had spent time together and they understood each other, and they probably had military conversations, and they probably had conversations about God, and they probably had conversations about family. And there's been some men who have suggested that the person, because Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather, there have been some that have supposed, because of how close David and Ahithophel would have been, that the man that said to David, this is not your wife, there have been some that have supposed that it was Ahithophel. It may have been somebody completely different. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us, or if it does, I haven't found it. So David tells Hushai to go back, and God's going to use him in Absalom's presence. David then tells Hushai about Zadok and Abiathar. Remember, Zadok and Abiathar started to bring the ark out, and David says, you and your sons, Zadok and his son Ahimaaz, and Abiathar and his son Jonathan, you guys go back. You'll be my eyes and ears. You can use your sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, to be the ones that are the runners to communicate information between us. And Hushai is going to be right in the middle of this whole deal. This whole spy situation that's going on, Hushai is going to be used by God in the middle of all of this situation. And so David begins to tell Hushai what's already happened with Zadok and Abiathar. And he says, and hast thou, in verse 35, and hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priests? Therefore it shall be, that what thing soever thou shalt hear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. By them shall ye send unto me everything that ye can hear. Ahimaaz and Jonathan are going to be the runners for this. And let me just read this last verse. I'll tell you something super interesting about Ahimaaz. It says in verse 37, so Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. So Hushai now goes back after listening to David, and as he's going back about the same time, Absalom's coming in. And as you continue to read this, they're going to kind of almost come in, not exactly the same time, but they're almost going to come at the same time, and Absalom's going to call Hushai out and go, you're friends with my dad, and are you really with me? And there's going to be some things that happen there. But let me tell you about Ahimaaz. There's a really interesting verse about Ahimaaz. Ahimaaz must have been like some great athlete. Over in 2 Samuel chapter 18, when Absalom is dead, and after Joab kills Absalom, Ahimaaz is wanting to go back and tell David, but Joab's in somebody else, and then Ahimaaz just basically begs Joab to let him go tell him also, after Joab kind of gives him some questions about it, and Joab finally says yes, and Ahimaaz is running. He is like your modern day track star. He is like your modern day, or not modern day. He would have been your Bible Times. I got it backwards. He would have been your Bible Times track star. He would have been like Bible Times Usain Bolt. Listen to this verse over in 2 Samuel chapter 18 about Ahimaaz. Ahimaaz is running back to the king to tell the king that the news about Absalom. And the Bible says, 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 27, and the watchman said, methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz the son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man, and cometh with good tidings. So the watchman that's watching people come to the city sees a man way off in the distance who's running like a rocket. And that watchman says, that guy is so fast, he's literally like Ahimaaz. Ahimaaz must have had some sort of name within the city, within the community. Maybe there were little kids racing each other in the streets of Jerusalem, and they were like, man, nobody can beat Ahimaaz. But Ahimaaz had either some special running style, or he had some special running speed. I think it was a combination of both that was identifiable even when you couldn't see that it was him specifically. And the watchman goes and tells David, said, there's somebody running up here, and they're running just like Ahimaaz runs. I think that's really neat. This was the runner for David. I go back to David and his character. David knew people. He understood people. He was able to connect with people. He had this skill that God had given him to be able to understand the gifts that different people had. And David knew that when he sent Zadok and Abiathar back, and their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, were going to go with him, David knew Ahimaaz had a skill in running either super fast or super special. Maybe he wasn't like a sprinter. Maybe he was the fastest long distance runner. Maybe he couldn't run a 40 in like 4.4 flat or something, but maybe he could run a mile in 4 minutes or something. But he just knew that was a skill Ahimaaz had, so he could be used in this whole spy system. I love the little details like that in Bible stories. So Ahithophel, there's your one detail. Ahithophel, his name means my brother is foolish, and that's what David prays for. And then when he prays for that, God sends Hushai up here to basically become an answer to that prayer. And then David's counsel to Hushai is, listen, I got Zadok and Abiathar and Ahimaaz. He's the runner. And I wonder if Hushai's going, oh, Ahimaaz, he's fast. He'll be good at getting in and out of there. So I got Ahimaaz and Jonathan who are going to be the runners to communicate these things. So you tell Zadok and Abiathar, they'll tell Ahimaaz and Jonathan, and then Ahimaaz and Jonathan will run out here, and Absalom won't worry about them because they're not the main people in the palace. So he's going to be paying attention to you. He's going to be paying attention to Zadok and Abiathar. I mean, when you really grasp what's happening here, it's a super amazing strategic thing that David's accomplishing. And I don't believe he accomplishes it apart from God. I think that David's made a choice here that a lot of this is happening because of decisions he made. It's his fault. He's in this position because of his own decisions. He's accepted responsibility. He's made things right with God. And even though he's made things right with God, he's got all kinds of family problems that are still repercussions of the decisions he made. And now he's got enough clarity in his mind to develop a plan that God blesses. He still loses his son. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's not like Absalom's not his son. It's easy to go, man, David beat Absalom. It's his son. Like, what dad? I mean, I get out and play basketball with my sons, and I want to beat them in basketball. But what dad wants to go to fisticuffs with their child and beat the mess out? I mean, that's not normal. That's not good. So, I mean, there's still some turmoil going on in David's heart. Yet David's prayer was that God would turn the foolishness of Ahithophel, or turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And so I want to first, as we kind of walk through this idea, how can I be an answer to prayer? First, I need to give you the assessment of what's happening here. Okay, so there's the plot, right? The plot here among these 7 verses here, the plot is Ahithophel's with Absalom. Absalom's got the hearts of the people. Absalom's young. Absalom's an influencer. Think about like what an influencer is today. He's stolen the hearts. He's really entreated himself to the people. Absalom's extremely handsome. Absalom's got a lot of authority because he is the king's son. Absalom's made himself look strong by getting all the chariots out in the city and drive them around to make him look like, oh man, he's really impressive. Now, not only that, but now he's got a super wise man in Ahithophel with him. And David's going, oh man, oh, this is not going to be good. So the plot is Ahithophel and Absalom are with the other conspirators. There's other conspirators with them, but these two are super powerful when they're together to accomplish evil. Secondly, there's the prayer. David's prayer is, in verse 31, he specifically says, I pray thee. He's talking to God. He says, I pray thee. David's prayer is, God, if you would get in the middle of this, in my defense, knowing that I am wrong, knowing that I caused this situation. I mean, just think about sin in our lives. Are we wrong? Yes. Did we cause these problems? Yes. Well, God still decides to die in our place? Yes. What an amazing gift of grace. What an amazing God of mercy. What an amazing thing it is that God gets right in the middle of these prayers and answers them knowing that we don't deserve them. So David's prayer was, God, turn the counsel of the man whose name means my brother is foolish into foolishness. Thirdly, notice the person that is the answer to that prayer. His name is Hushai. Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. Hushai shows up and he thinks, I'm going to go with David. I don't want to be a conspirator with Absalom. I don't want to be in the kingdom without David. I don't want to be in these situations. I want to go with David. And David goes, Hushai, listen, you may not know this, but I was just up on the mountain and I was praying that God would turn the foolishness of Ahithophel, or turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And then God sent you here. You may not realize that's what's going on, but that's what's happening right now, Hushai. God sent you here, so I need you to go back. I've already had a conversation with Zadok and Abiathar about their sons. I need you to go back. I need you to go back there and get right in the middle of the court, and they're going to have some questions, but you're an older man, you're a wise man, you know how to handle all this situation, and God's going to use you. Fourthly, that's the plan. I got ahead of myself right there. Fourthly, the plan. That David is going to ask Hushai to be used by God. Well, how does the plan work? Well, we've got these priests right in the middle of it. See, we need God to be right in the middle of this and for God to use God's people. So this assessment of the situation is all centered around, lastly here, our sixth point on this first idea, the place. Absalom is power hungry. Absalom, and you'll find this out when we get to the place where we're reading about Absalom coming into the palace. Absalom doesn't have any idea about what he's going to do once he gets it. He just wants it. He wants the attention. He wants the power. He's jealous. He's angry that his dad didn't do something about Amnon and Tamar. He's angry that his dad, when he brought him back in, then turned him back away at the last minute. He's angry that he basically had to beg for a meeting with his dad so that they could have reconciliation, and all this anger is beginning to flow out. Now, Ahithophel comes in, and he's angry because Bathsheba was his granddaughter. Uriah was Bathsheba's husband. And by this point, all of those in the inner court understand what's happened to Uriah. Nathan's come in and put it on display by God's message, put it on display for everybody to see. And so Ahithophel is aware of what's going on, and Ahithophel's sitting over there, and he may have been the guy who told David not to do this. We don't know that for a fact. A lot of people suppose that. I don't know. I think there's a good chance. But whatever the case is, whenever Ahithophel found out, he was not happy about this. Now Ahithophel goes, Absalom's angry, and I'm angry. Let's get two angry people and put them together, and maybe we can really get back at David. And I can just picture Absalom telling Ahithophel about all the things that David did wrong. And Ahithophel sitting over there in agreement. Yeah, he is wrong. And here's some things he did wrong to me. And these two supposed to be men, but almost gossip queens now, are just over there feeling sorry for themselves and encouraging themselves and doing bad things to somebody. And of course, David was wrong in all of this. Okay, but two wrongs don't make a right. David should have behaved himself differently. Absalom should have behaved himself differently. Ahithophel should have behaved himself differently. So just because we can say David was wrong, and he was wrong, and this is his fault, still, what we're going to find out is David made things right between him and God. We're not going to see that with Ahithophel. We're not going to see that with Absalom. David made things right between him and God. When he was confronted and Nathan said, "Thou art the man," David was like, "Oh, buddy, we're in trouble. God knows." And he goes and immediately makes things right between him and God. Absalom and Ahithophel never do that. So not only do they have horizontal issues, but they also have vertical issues. David solved the vertical issue by humbling himself before God, by deferring to God, by being godly sorrow, godly repentance over his sin. He solved the vertical part of it by humbling himself before God and asking for forgiveness. Absalom's not going to do that. Ahithophel's not going to do that. So that's the assessment of what we have going on here. Remember, the idea we're talking about is how to be an answer to prayer, but I need you to understand exactly what's going on because this is going to make a lot more sense on how to be an answer to prayer. So let's notice the adversaries. We've seen the assessment. Notice the adversaries. First, there's Absalom. We don't know a whole lot about Absalom's childhood. Well, we don't know what it was like. We don't know if Absalom comes running around in the palace in his little Israel diaper and sits up on David's lap and they tell stories about David fighting a bear. And I think they did. I think that conversation happened because of the counsel that Hushai gives. I can't wait to get to that part. But I think that Absalom knew the stories about David even before he was born. David had these songs that were written about him. People are singing these songs. Saul killed his thousands. David kills his tens of thousands. I mean, everybody in Israel knew who he was. And not only that, but David was super personable. I mean, he cared about the smallest of people and he entreated himself. That's why this sin with Bathsheba is so out of character. And it's why I am convinced that you and I and anyone is capable of doing the most wicked, vile things that we never dreamed we would ever do. We would ever even consider. I believe we are capable of it. And it's the grace of God and the mercy of God as we humble ourselves before Him that keeps us from falling into the greatest depravity of sin that mankind has ever known. I certainly don't want to be a parable for somebody. I don't want somebody to be watching this video saying, Brother Barrett had great potential, whatever this and that, but he gave his heart and life over to sin, and boy, he really fell out of ministry, this and that. That's a hard battle that sits before me. I don't want to be like that. I don't want my kids to think that he could have had a better father. My wife thinks she could have had a better husband because he fell into the traps that are there. They're there for all of us. And the moment we get to a place where we in our hearts say, I would never do that, we find ourselves trapped. Our own pride has trapped us. So Absalom goes here from this child. And we don't know a lot about Absalom's childhood. I'm kind of speculating here. But there's some insinuations from things that Hushai says that I think are super interesting when we get to that. But Absalom as a child, there was some strong connection between him and David. You just see the way that David weeps for him. You see the way David longs for him. You'll even see some things after Absalom's dead, after he's been killed by Joab, even though David tells those three generals there, I think it's Abishai, Joab, and Ittai, tells them, listen, don't harm Absalom. Joab doesn't listen to any of that mess. And so he goes out and he actually does kill him. But there was this strong emotional connection between David and Absalom. And Absalom went from a child to a competitor. And I was talking with somebody just a little while ago about this spirit of competition. I think competition is good, and I think we can learn a lot of things from it. But I got to be honest with you, inside ministry, the competition part of things, I'm not interested in any of that. If you want to be right, just be right. If you want to get up and smite your chest and make a loud noise or whatever, you just go ahead and have at it. I won't judge you. Just do what you think the Lord wants you to do. But I'm not interested in competition. This is not me versus you. I'm already fighting myself. I'm already fighting my own flesh. I'm already fighting whatever the devil and his demons that have followed him have against me. I'm already fighting the world and its system. The internet system is just waiting to find one of these videos and for me to say one wrong thing so I can be crucified over it. I'm already fighting over all of these things. Why do I want to fight another child of God? Why do I want to fight a family member? Why do I want to fight a church member? I'm really not interested in that. I guess if I get pushed in a corner and I have to, but I'm not interested in that. And I'm sure David at this point is thinking to himself, man, I'd give anything if I was fighting somebody, if there was somebody to come in and take the kingdom, and I was fighting somebody who wasn't a family member or a friend, but was from out of country. It was like, if it was Syria or if it was the Philistines or if it, somebody, I'd stay in there and I'd fight them. But I don't really have any interest in going out here and getting my sword and Absalom getting his sword and seeing which one of us comes out the better. Absalom went from child to competitor. He is now not just an adversary of David, his father, but Absalom is an adversary of God himself. God never appoints Absalom to be king. God never anoints Absalom to be king. Absalom is taking this by force. Absalom is taking this by manipulation. Absalom is taking this by deceit. And those things never end well. They never end the way that you think they're going to end. Just go back historically and look how coups have ended in different governments. These things never end the way that you think they're going to end, and your cause is not as righteous as you think it is. Absalom was an adversary. He was a child, but now he's a competitor. Then we have Ahithophel. Ahithophel went from being a counselor. A counselor would have been someone who would have given David advice. It would have been someone that David would have talked over things. Maybe David didn't always listen to the advice. He was the king. He had the final say-so as appointed by God. But this counselor would have had great influence in David's life. And David was a very wise man himself and wouldn't have just had weirdos giving him counsel. Ahithophel was probably an extremely wise and smart man. And that's probably an indicator why David prays for God, because God was the only one who could probably take the wisdom that Ahithophel had to pray to God to turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. Ahithophel had gone from counselor to conspirator. Right? That's what the Bible tells us. Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. Ahithophel has gone from counselor to conspirator. He's now trying to figure out how to smear your name, David. He's now trying to figure out how to make you look bad. And we all know how wise Ahithophel is. We all know how capable Ahithophel is. And David's thinking to himself, the only one I got can help me in this situation is God himself. And so he turns to the Lord. Absalom has gone from child to competitor. Ahithophel has gone from counselor to conspirator. And as this story unfolds, you'll see when Absalom finally comes in to get the throne, he basically has no idea what he wants to do. And he's going to turn to Ahithophel and say, what should we do? Now that we got what we wanted, what should we do? Where there is no vision, the people perish. He had no vision as a king. He had no vision as a leader. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a king. He might have been the king's son, but can I tell you this? He was in how he behaved himself in all points a giant loser. And I've seen this many times in life where people really think they're hot stuff. They really think that I've got all the looks and I've got all that. I mean, some people, I got great hair. Well, guess what? I got great shine on my bald head. I bet you can't beat that. I mean, people really think extremely highly of themselves. I mean, that's why Paul says we ought not to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. That's why Paul says we should esteem each other better than ourselves. That's why Paul says we shouldn't compare ourselves against other people. That's not wise. But Absalom's been doing some comparing. Ahithophel's been doing some comparing. They've been getting themselves together, deciding, you know what? I think we can get back at David for what he's done here in this situation. I think we can get back at him. I think we can make his life miserable. I think we can smear his name. I think we can take all his stuff. I think we can really get in here. We've got the hearts of the people now. We've got our own plan. He's not here the whole time. Behind the scenes, God's working on David's behalf. Zadok and Abiathar were not called out of the city by David. They were not called out of the city by David. God moved them to go out and have that conversation with David so that David would be given the opportunity to defer to God so that God could continue to work on their behalf. So they go back to the city. David finds out Ahithophel's among the conspirators. God sends Hushai out. And when I say sends out Zadok and Abiathar and sends out Hushai, I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that decisions were made by men, but in those decisions, the sovereignty of God displayed itself. The sovereignty of God. God did not play puppeteer with these men, but the sovereignty of God in the situation, going all the way back to these deep relationships that David made with people, that Zadok and Abiathar, they respected David, and Hushai, he respected David, and Ittai, he respected David. David lost the respect of a lot of people, including Joab, including Abishai, including his own sons, and he lost the respect of a lot of people. But there were some that he had made such an impact on that they said, you know what, you made a mistake, you were wrong, but we're still going to follow you out. We're still going to go with you. And God's sovereignty got right in the middle of all this. It's he's reaping what he's sowing now with the sin that he committed with Bathsheba. But these interpersonal relationships that he has with Ittai and Zadok and Abiathar and Hushai and some other men that are going to show up here in a little bit, these interpersonal relationships he has with them, he's also reaping from those. And he's reaping from those very positive things because he's sown positive things into their lives. You see, what he sowed into Absalom's life was, I'm not going to do anything about this situation with Amnon and Tamar because I've set a bad example. How am I going to legally hold Amnon responsible when God didn't hold me legally responsible? And so he didn't do anything about it. And then when Absalom got upset about it, he didn't figure out the plan that he had to kill his brother. And then he didn't do anything about it and didn't call Absalom home from Grandma and Grandpa's house. And then when finally Joab convinces him to do it, he does. But then at the last minute, turns away. All of these things are being reaped now with Absalom. But we don't see all of the other positive reaping. It's easy to miss that. There are reaping sometimes that are going on simultaneously. Reapings of the flesh. Somebody can be having a terrible time at home, but they can be having an awesome time at work because they've worked hard. They've neglected their family, but they've worked hard at work and built the respect of their peers at their workplace. And that's what you see going on here. He's rejected one side with bad behavior, but there's been good behavior that's won the respect in the hearts of others. These adversaries, they're coming to get David. And they're going to come in, and Absalom, who was once on David's side, went from a child to a competitor, and Ahithophel, who was once on David's side, went from a counselor to a conspirator. Now, the sermon title is How to Be an Answer to Prayer. And now that we've given you an assessment and we've identified the adversaries, I want to tell you the answer to how to be an answer to prayer. And the answer is our third point, the available. If you want to be an answer to prayer, you must be available. I've heard it in sports. I've heard it in business. I've heard it in church. The best ability is availability. The best ability is availability. And there's some people who will never make themselves available because the local New Testament church isn't a big deal to them. So when there's revival meetings going on, they're nowhere to be found. Well, Wednesday night services aren't important, so we're not going to be there. The high days, we want to be a part of the high days, so we're going to be there for that. But the low days, we won't be there for the low days. Sorry about that. No one else is going, so I'm not going to go. Availability, when I say availability, I don't mean necessarily to your pastor, although that's not a bad idea. But the availability I'm talking about is making yourself available to God. David prayed for God to turn the counsel, I keep saying that backwards, to turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness, and God sent a man who was ready. He was available. He was there. He was a part of David's life. We don't know all the details of Hushai's life because he just shows up suddenly here. But he's an older man, indicated by what David says. And I think it's over in Chronicles, maybe it's in Kings. I should have looked it up before I started this video. But there is a verse that says that Ahithophel was David's counselor and Hushai was David's companion. Companion indicates that this wasn't a one-time thing. They had a relationship that they did stuff together. So Hushai was sowing into someone's life over and over again by availability. I'm sure Hushai wasn't giving counsel to the king on a daily basis. That was Ahithophel's position. I'm sure David, maybe he did, but probably David went to his counselors to get advice. He probably didn't go to Hushai. He's probably going to Hushai for more of a friendship connection, an emotional connection that two men together can bond together and become friends and companions. Hushai was available. And there are so many men that I've talked to who will say things like, hey, if I can help with that, let me know. And then you call them and they go, oh, sorry, I can't help with that. And that happens. Listen, that happens. Okay, that's called life. But there are some men that's the habit of their life. They are never available. Not necessarily to me, not necessarily to you, but they're never available to God. There's stuff going around at church all the time, and they're just completely oblivious and unaware, not because it's not told, but because they're never there. I've seen situations before. I know of a pastor who told me that they were going to have the Lord's Supper at their church. So he put it in the bulletin for 3 straight weeks. He put it on the PowerPoint presentation for 3 straight weeks. He announced it during the announcements for 3 straight weeks. And then the week before the Lord's Supper, he mailed out individual letters to all the church members to remind them and kind of give them some advice on how to prepare their heart. And there was still a lady who walked in that night and said, I didn't know we were doing this. How does that happen? We are not available to hear. Sometimes we're even present, but our mind is just somewhere else. Our mind is not thinking about God at church because we got other affairs that concern us more. Hushai, this is the answer to the question that's the title. How to be an answer to prayer. You be available. Availability is the greatest ability. You have to live your life in a way that God has liberty to break in any moment that He wants to. And it's hard. I get it. It's hard. I'm not telling you what I'm telling you right now is easy. What I'm telling you right now is if you really want to know the answer on how to be an answer to prayer, it is this. It is availability. It is checking in. It is being there. And I'm going to kind of unravel this idea of availability. So we're going to see a couple things. This is going a lot longer than I thought it was, but I love Hushai. There's so much information I want to give you. There was Hushai. He was available, but he wasn't the only one that was available. Hushai went from a companion to a confidant. Hushai showed up and said, I'm with you. I'm going with you. I'm with you. And David says, hey, listen, I got a secret I need to share with you. Zadok and Abiathar were just out here. I sent them back, and I told them to use their sons to kind of run this message between us. He said, I want you to go back. I want you to be in the king's court. You're going to be my eyes and ears that communicates to them on the things that they don't see. They're going to communicate to their sons, and their sons are going to run out here. Hushai, when given the opportunity by God, changed from a companion, change is not the right word, grew beyond being just a companion to now also being a confidant. But it wasn't just Hushai. There was also the helpers. Zadok and Abiathar, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, these also are available. They made themselves available. David did not tell Zadok and Abiathar to leave. They left of their own free will and choice. And David then defers and goes, listen, the Ark of the Covenant is not a good luck charm. That's not how this works. God's place is back there in Jerusalem. You take that back there. And then also while you're going, I think God kind of arranged this meeting real quick. While you're going back, just know you can be a blessing and God can use you in this situation. David didn't know Hushai was also coming. At that point, when David was putting together the plan, he didn't think to himself, wait till Hushai gets here. That's not what happened. He finds out, somebody comes and says, Ahithophel's with Absalom, and David goes, oh no, God, what are we going to do now? God, I need you to get right in the middle of this situation. And then Hushai shows up. Now, how do you make yourself available? 3 minutes, I'm going to be done with this. How do you make yourself available? It's very, very simple. You make yourself available by 3 things. It's revealed to us here in this passage. Number 1, you listen. Verse 33 and verse 34, Hushai comes and says, I'm going with you. And David says, no, if you go with me, it's going to be too much. I need you to go back home. Hushai listened. There are some people who come and say, what can I do for you? Or how can I be a blessing to you? Or how can I help you? And then the person says, well, I need this. And then that person who came and said, I would like to help you goes, oh, I can't do that. Listen, I personally, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I don't think God puts you in a place where he can use you and you don't have the skills to do it or the ability to do it. I think God is going to place you in a place knowing how he created you to be used the way that he created you. Sometimes it's just inconvenient for us. And inconvenience and availability they're not synonymous. They don't go together. So how do you become available? First of all, you listen. You have to listen. Stop talking and listen. This is one of my biggest problems. I struggle to listen. I know that about myself. I've been working on this for years and I'm still struggling with it. I am a talker. I struggle to listen. But if I want to be available to people, I'm going to have to shut my mouth and I'm going to have to listen. Listening is extremely powerful. It's one of the greatest gifts that God has given my wife. She is an amazing listener. She has to be with me, but she is an amazing listener. Secondly, how do I make myself available? First, you listen. Secondly, you look. Pay attention to what's going on in someone's life. Sometimes people aren't going to tell you, I could use a meal. Sometimes people aren't going to tell you, I could use somebody just to be here with me. Look around. Notice how they're behaving. Notice what's going on in their life. Notice verse 35 and 36. It says, and hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar and the priests? David says, look back. Zadok and Abiathar are there with their sons. God can use you if you'll go back there. David doesn't know how they're going to do this. David just knows it's going to happen. He's asked God. He's prayed for God. God sent Hushai. There's still a lot of logistics that have to be worked out. How do you become available? You listen. You look around. Look around at what somebody might need. All right? There's a reason why missionaries show up at a church that pastors or deacons or somebody will go out and look at the missionaries' tires to see if their tires are bald and they need new tires on. Why? Because missionaries are driving all over the country and tires wear out. They're not asking the mission, and sometimes they do, I guess, but they're looking on purpose. They're looking for a way to be a blessing. They're not waiting. They're listening and they're looking. Lastly, how do you become available? You launch. You listen to what someone's saying. You look around in their life and figure out some ways that you can be a blessing. And thirdly, you launch out. And this is what launch out means. You do it. You do it. In verse 37, it says, so Hushai, David's friend, came into the city. David said, I want you to go back. I want you to be used by God. And Hushai did it. Hushai could have told David, I don't know, man, that sounds like a lot. I'm kind of nervous. That really puts me outside my comfort zone. That's really kind of inconvenient. I just got out here. I literally just tore my coat and put dirt on my head. Like, I just got here. You could use me here, right? I could be an encouragement here. I could do something else. And David says, this is what I need you to do. How to be an answer to prayer. Stop telling the person what they need. Listen. Sometimes they're not going to know what they need. Okay, sometimes people are obstinate. Sometimes people are naive. Sometimes people are just oblivious. Okay, but overall, when you're talking about Christian brothers and sisters, and you want to know, man, what can we do? I'll tell you what you can do. Listen. Show up and listen. Look around and see how you can be a blessing. Take what they're saying and what's happening together, put it all and make it part of the puzzle and put it all together and make the puzzle pieces together, and then do something. Actually launch out and do it. I think when the Lord showed me this, because I had this feeling of, man, God, I want to help people, but I don't know how. And I think when God finally helped me with this first point, and if you know me, you know it's true. If you know me, you know I'm a talker. But when God finally helped me with, Barrett, stop talking and listen to that person. What I found out was me listening to them alleviated a lot because they needed somebody to be there to hear them. That is so powerful in people's lives. No matter what they're going through, it is so powerful for you to be there and just listen. Sometimes, me personally, someone tells me something's going on, I immediately want to have an answer for them. I can help you with that. God's word says this, and I've seen this happen before. But really what they want is not an answer. They want someone to care. They want someone to listen. They want someone to be there. How do you become an answer to prayer? You listen. You make yourself available by listening, looking, and launching. Well, that's the That's the message here for today. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. I love Hushai. Hushai is one of my favorite Bible characters, and I have just fallen in love with the guy. And I hope that as we continue with Hushai, I hope that you begin to fall in love with him too. I love the way God uses him. I love the character he shows. I love his courage. I love his bravery. There's some things that he says to Absalom, and I may be reading too much into this. There's some things he says to Absalom that I just go, man, he is really laying it on thick and using a lot of wisdom in that situation. Next week, we're going to have chapter 16 is going to show up. We're going to have a little interlude while Hushai is going back to Jerusalem, going back to the king's palace. But next week, we're going to look at this idea in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. Don't lose your discernment while you're hurting. Don't lose your discernment while you're hurting. All right, Lord bless you. Have a good night. Thank you for joining.